Before 9/11, there was another morning when an entire city disappeared in seconds. No warning sirens, no enemy planes overhead, just a quiet harbor and one mistake. December 6, 1917, Halifax, Nova Scotia. At 9:04 a.m., a flash brighter than lightning tore across the sky. A pressure wave followed so violent it ripped buildings from their foundations. Windows shattered miles away. Families eating breakfast were buried under collapsing walls before they even understood the sound. In less than 20 seconds, the Halifax Explosion became the deadliest man-made blast North America had ever seen. Nearly 2,000 people would die. Thousands more would be blinded by flying glass. An entire district of the city would vanish. But here's what makes this story terrifying. The explosion didn't happen because of war. It happened because two ships misjudged each other in a narrow harbor. And for 20 full minutes before the blast, people stood and watched. Halifax wasn't just a quiet port. During World War I, it was one of the most important Allied supply hubs in North America. That morning, a French cargo ship, SS Mont Blanc, entered the harbor loaded with TNT, picric acid, and highly flammable benzol. In simple terms, it was a floating bomb. At the same time, the Norwegian relief vessel SS Imo was leaving through the same narrow channel. Signals were exchanged, whistles were blown. Both captains believed the other would give way. Neither did. The ships scraped together. Sparks ignited spilled benzol. Flames climbed fast. For 20 minutes, the burning Mont Blanc drifted toward the pier. Crowds gathered to watch. Children pressed against school windows. They thought it was just a fire. They were standing beside the largest bomb on Earth. Fire crews rushed toward the burning Mont Blanc. They had no idea what was inside. The crew of the French ship had already abandoned it. They rowed desperately toward shore, shouting warnings in French. Most people couldn't understand them. The flames spread faster. Barrels of benzol exploded one by one. The ship drifted closer to Pier 6. On the docks, railway workers paused to stare. Office clerks stepped outside. Parents lifted children onto shoulders for a better view. The fire had become a spectacle. Inside the hull sat nearly 3,000 tons of high explosives, more than many wartime battlefields would see in a single strike. For almost 20 minutes, the ship burned uncontrollably in the middle of the harbor. No evacuation order, no citywide warning, no sirens, just a growing crowd and a ticking clock no one could hear. At 9:04 a.m., the fire reached the cargo hold. What happened next would rip Halifax off the map. At exactly 9:04 a.m., the fire reached the main cargo hold. There was no countdown, no final warning. Just a flash so bright survivors later said it turned the sky white. The Mont Blanc detonated with a force equal to nearly 3 kilotons of TNT. In a split second, the ship was vaporized. A pressure wave exploded outward faster than sound, flattening everything within half a mile. Entire neighborhoods were erased instantly. Steel rails twisted like wire. Brick buildings turned to dust. The blast was later known as the Halifax Explosion, at the time the largest human-made explosion in history. An anchor weighing half a ton was thrown more than 2 miles inland. A tsunami formed in the harbor, rising nearly 60 feet in some areas. Ships were hurled onto shore like toys. Thousands standing at their windows were blinded by flying glass. And in less than 20 seconds, a thriving city became a smoking crater. But the worst part wasn't the blast. It was what came after. Silence came first. After the shockwave passed, survivors described a ringing quiet, broken only by distant screams. More than 1,600 buildings were destroyed. Another 12,000 were damaged. Entire families were buried beneath collapsed homes. Fires spread from broken gas lines and overturned stoves. Rescuers dug with bare hands through splintered wood and frozen rubble. Hospitals filled within minutes. Doctors performed amputations with little anesthesia. Over 6,000 were injured, many permanently blinded by shattered glass. The blast had been more powerful than any weapon previously used in North America. Then nature struck again. That night, a brutal snowstorm hit Halifax. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow buried the wreckage and trapped survivors beneath it. With telegraph lines down and railways twisted, the outside world barely understood the scale. An entire city was crippled, and help was still far away. For hours, Halifax was cut off from the world. Telegraph lines were shredded, railway tracks twisted like wire. Outside cities received only broken messages. Explosion, massive damage, need doctors. When the scale became clear, help moved fast. Boston responded within hours. Relief trains carried surgeons, nurses, and supplies north through a blizzard. American crews worked beside Canadian responders, pulling survivors from rubble and setting up shelters. It became one of the greatest cross-border rescue efforts in North American history. Even today, Nova Scotia sends Boston a Christmas tree in gratitude. But as aid arrived, another question spread. How did a ship packed with explosives enter a crowded harbor so easily? Who was truly responsible? Because after the smoke cleared, blame became as explosive as the blast itself. Within days, investigators flooded Halifax. Was it the Norwegian ship's fault? Did Mont Blanc violate harbor rules? Or was the port itself dangerously unprepared for wartime traffic? The Norwegian vessel, SS Emo, had been traveling faster than normal inside the narrow channel. Mont Blanc, loaded with explosives, carried no visible warning signs large enough to alert the public. Both ships exchanged signals. Both captains believed they had the right of way. When they collided, the spark was accidental. But the system that allowed it? That was preventable. Initial hearings blamed Mont Blanc. Later appeals shifted responsibility toward Emo. In the end, legal battles dragged on, but no punishment could undo what happened. The truth was uncomfortable. Halifax had become a wartime powder keg. One crowded harbor, too many ships, too much explosive cargo, and one moment of human misjudgment. But the physical damage was only half the story. The psychological scars would last generations. In the weeks after the blast, Halifax looked like a battlefield. More than 25,000 people, nearly half the population, were left without shelter. Entire neighborhoods had to be rebuilt from nothing. Thousands suffered permanent eye damage from flying glass. Mass graves were dug because too many bodies could not be identified quickly. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of abandoning the city, survivors rebuilt it stronger. Stricter harbor rules were introduced. New safety laws for explosive cargo spread across North America. The disaster permanently changed how ports handled dangerous materials. But one detail still haunts historians. The explosion was heard over 100 miles away. Its shockwaves circled the globe. So ask yourself, if a blast like that happened today, would we truly be ready? In the months after the explosion, Halifax fought a second battle, rebuilding trust. Insurance claims overwhelmed officials, court cases dragged on. Families searched for names that would never appear on survivor lists. Nearly 2,000 people were dead. More than 9,000 were injured. It remains one of the deadliest non-nuclear explosions in history. Decades later, historians compared its devastation to the September 11 attacks. Before 9/11, this was the benchmark. Not because of terrorism, not because of invasion, but because of human error in a crowded harbor. What makes Halifax terrifying isn't just the scale, it's how ordinary it began. Ships, cargo, routine navigation. Nothing extraordinary until it was. So the final question remains. What did the world truly learn from Halifax? The Halifax explosion wasn't caused by a bomb dropped from the sky. It wasn't an act of terror. It wasn't a secret weapon. It was miscommunication, overconfidence, and a system that assumed nothing could go wrong. Before the atomic age, before modern terrorism, the Halifax explosion proved something terrifying. A single chain of small decisions can destroy an entire city. Two ships entered a narrow harbor. Signals were misunderstood. Warnings weren't clear enough. Crowds gathered out of curiosity. 20 minutes later, nearly 2,000 lives were gone. Today, ports are safer, cargo regulations are stricter, emergency systems are faster, but human nature hasn't changed. We still assume routine means safe. We still gather to watch danger unfold. So here's the question. If a modern city had 20 minutes before disaster, would we recognize the warning signs? Or would we stand at the window and watch?